gentlemen around the Delaware Valley, welcome to the McMenamin Wing show here on WWDB Talk 860. We've got a fantastic broadcast. Today is a very unique show. Very cool. Can't wait to bring it to everybody around the Delaware Valley. First, let me bring in our host, Tom Wing. How are you, sir?
Oh, great to be here, Joe. How you feeling?
I'm feeling great. We are on location. Let's here at McMenamin Wing, and of course, a shout out to our producer Matt Dietz, who is doing the heavy lifting for us. We're on location.
Well, we got a new supervisor too. We have our new intern Isabel, making sure Matt's doing what he's supposed to be doing.
Making sure. So you got a little accountability there. Fantastic. And of course, we got a great guest, Kaleigh Ryder, who is a senior counsel for one of the top insurance companies in the area. So today's broadcast is going to be understanding the workers' compensation system from both sides of the aisle. Kaleigh, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here today.
It's great to have you. And so, we've had these, these conversations in the past, and it's a fascinating discussion. So you're out there and listening, and just sit back and relax. Tom, just remind everybody, if you would, a little bit about the firm.
Sure. So my name's Tom Wing. I'm the managing partner here at McMenamin Wing. We're a full service workers' comp firm. We operate statewide through 4 different offices, although a little bird has told me we may be opening a Harrisburg office pretty soon.
Awesome.
Not me.
Well, fantastic. And by the way, when you say that, what's amazing, and before we talk about Kaleigh's story and her pathway, the law, we obviously the pandemic was a very difficult thing for so many of us. But one thing it did do is it opened up the workers' compensation and legal field in general with the practice of Zoom. We even do a lot of our radio broadcasts on Zoom, and it changed the world. Now, it was very difficult for some areas. If you were in the hospitality business, very difficult. But in your world, the potential and the ability to open up different locations and bring in new clientele and service them to the top has been incredible.
Certainly, I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I think Kaleigh will probably echo this, although I don't want to speak for her, but certainly the access that people have to the justice system in workers' comp is much better now with virtual hearings and things like that. You don't have to schlep all over the state to do most of the hearings. But what it has also done, which is a little bit of a downside, is opened the practice up to some dabblers. And so you have people that really don't understand this system. Usually it's a personal injury lawyer that thinks, oh, this is just a subset of personal injury. I can handle it. And they can do a lot of damage to these claims. Well,
it's very interesting that you say that, because workers' comp is one of the most specialized areas in law. And we know that. We've talked. I had, in fact, it was one of my clients who's a top medical malpractice attorney who said directly, and he said, crackerjack, he said, I dabbled in workers' comp 20 years ago or 10 years ago, whatever. I got the hell out of that quickly because it's such a specialized area. And the cool thing about that is he was, he knew enough to just get out, not disservice to the clients. Let me bring in Kaleigh Ryder. Kaleigh, obviously, we're welcome. We're so happy that you're here. But tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and your pathway to where you're at.
Yeah, I mean, just a little bit about myself. I work for an insurance company in-house right now. I have 2 kids. One is 11. The other one is 4.
Awesome.
I am recently engaged, just trying to make my way in my new company. But it's actually kind of funny how I got here. I really like to tell the story because I do think that it's kind of inspirational for first-generation lawyers, because I myself am a first-generation lawyer. Mm-hmm. Never considered law school. I wanted to be a teacher or a psychologist, work in like clinical therapy. And then I had my daughter with my ex. He is not the greatest person in the world. We'll just kind of leave it at that. But I am a very bullheaded person. I think Tom knows how that is.
I've had that experience on the other side of a couple of cases.
But so my daughter's father, while I was pregnant, basically told me that I should quit school and get a full-time job.
You'll never amount to anything, right?
Yes. And that is a quote. You will never amount to anything. You should just get a job because you are having a child.
Wow.
And then he served me custody papers 2 weeks after my daughter was born, wanting full custody. And the allegation for that was because I was too young to be a parent.
Wow.
My first custody attorney had just graduated law school, and she was an idiot.
Okay.
She was not good at her job. I quickly switched firms, and I made the decision that if she could pass the bar exam, maybe I could too.
Wow.
So I decided to take the LSAT 2 weeks before the exam. Got like a 153 or 156. I forget the number, enough that I got into 2 schools. And I got a scholarship and ended up going to Widener. I worked you're only allowed to work 20 hours a week in law school. It's like the rule. That's what you can do. So I worked 20 hours a week at a bar. Had my daughter, who was 3 at the time I started law school.
So you were a single mother going to law
Yep.
school, working 20 hours a week.
And
Yep.
they limit you. The ABA, in order
They
to be an
do.
ABA accredited school, you cannot allow any of your students
Yep.
to work more than 20 hours a week. That's tough.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I am not upset or feel any different way about it. I had food stamps while I was in law school at the beginning.
Sure.
I had assistance with daycare while I was in law school. I had to keep 20 hours. I relied on the help from the government because, child support only goes so far. The income you get from a bar only goes so far. But I ended up doing internships between 20 to 40 hours a week.
Wow.
For every single semester I was in school after your first year, because that's when you can start doing your internships. And I interned at an ADA's office for almost a full year doing actual cases during that time.
Which, by the way, a lot of firm owners will talk about when they want talent, that's where they go, to the ADA's office.
Yep.
Because obviously the workload is what it is.
Mhm.
Your story is so inspirational. Right off the bat, I'm sitting there going, I want her representing me, okay? Because that type of tenacity, and you're at that point not only a single mother, but you have somebody who's actually fighting against you.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, I was in and out of custody court, I think 3 or 4 times during law school, just law school alone. And keep in mind, that's a 3-year time period. So it was almost every 6 months.
I guess, that must have inspired you and many times to
Oh, yeah.
really buckle down. Like, in other words,
Oh, yeah.
you got 3 years here, get through it. And obviously at that point, the opportunities are endless.
Well, and it's not just that. We had some major family issues interpersonally with my sister. So there were times where I was getting out of bed at 2 a.m. to go help her with things. I almost failed a law school class because of it. I was in and out of the hospital with her a couple of times.
And let me just say, and I'm sorry to hear about that because
oh no, she is much better. It's gotten really, honestly, she is so much better. She's having a baby. We're very proud of her.
Well, and that's awesome. And I want to say something. When I think back, that story, a lot of times in life, and you decided, and it can happen to anybody. Listen, I've never even tried marijuana, not once. I owned a nightclub for 15 years, but for the grace of God, there go I. And what does that mean? It means that, if I'm in the Northeast and I got to cut through Kensington Avenue to get where I got to get, if I'm driving, I don't walk or I don't drive up Kensington Avenue. It's a totally different story, but I don't say to myself, I'm better than these people, but for the grace of God, there go I. And the reason I say that is this, because with all the odds that you had and things stacked up against you, you could have become an easy statistic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a real easy one.
Yep.
And you chose in the face of that to, do what you had to do for your children. And it's awesome being here. I'm so happy. When I was putting the interview together, I did not know that. And I'm so happy that I do. It says so much about you. But I had a saying, and we had a family tragedy in 2014. And so I do 2 things when things are going down the tubes. I eat and I work.
Yep.
So I was very successful and I gained 50 pounds. However, I also had a saying, you have one responsibility right now. Well, or 2, breathe, and move. You don't have to solve the world's problems today. But and again, you were dealing with young children at the time. So to say I commend you with that, and Tom, this is a great story. And here we are. You're an attorney and as established. I mean, one of the really established insurance companies, and you know, you also you also worked on the plaintiff side, so you understand both sides.
Yep.
And so you know, you must. I mean, obviously today, all those things that you went through, you wouldn't probably wish them on your worst enemy, but you wouldn't change a lot of them because they made you who you are now.
I mean, if I hadn't gone through there are so many steps that led up to this that if they had not happened, I wouldn't be here. If I hadn't taken a specific class in undergrad, I wouldn't be here. If I didn't have my daughter, I wouldn't be here. So as much as I do not like my ex, you know, I have to thank him for the success that I have.
Absolutely. I mean, and I have, you know, that is such a, thank you so much for sharing that. And it explains what, like you said, why we're here now. Here's a $10 million question. Tom Wing, one of the premier workers' compensation plaintiffs attorneys in the Delaware Valley, and a hell of a talk radio host, and like a celebrity on TikTok, and of course Kaleigh Ryder, a premier defense attorney, and working for how do you know one another? Tell us about your path.
We have two very different perspectives here.
Yes.
All right.
So we've had cases together, many
Really?
cases in Kaleigh's former position as a defense lawyer at
We don't talk about that very much.
And as Kaleigh will tell you, I am a fierce advocate for my clients, even when they may not be the greatest clients. And so
I would
we've
very
clashed
much
heads
agree with
many,
that.
many times because we are both very bullheaded.
Yeah. Well, and what was your experience, Kaleigh?
I think I objectively summarized it.
Well, let's just say there have been three, maybe four specific instances where I have cried in this industry working as an attorney.
Oh my God.
Tom is the result of one of them.
His tenacity.
Which I think makes me a really good lawyer. Just in fairness, if we're going to put that on the scale of what makes you a good lawyer.
Well, the fact that she's passionate enough to care enough to be brought to tears, and you know, I imagine that, you know, you guys.
Well, I think that's an important part of this practice. I'm glad you actually mentioned that because
I would 100%
there are
agree.
a lot of people in this practice who are in it because they looked at a movie or a TV show and said, "Oh, I want to be a lawyer because lawyers make a lot of money."
Oh yeah.
And those people make the worst lawyers, the absolute worst. The people who make the best lawyers are the people that want to do this work. And when you want to do this work, you get emotionally invested in it. You care about your clients. You care about your cases. You care about this system. And so you're going to be emotional when something happens that you don't think is the right outcome based on what all the work that you put in and all the knowledge that you have.
It is very interesting. And one of the things that, and in both of your cases, because Kaleigh, the pathway to workers' comp on either side, normally, and you've worked on both sides, okay? So a lot of guests on the broadcast will talk about, well, I worked on the defense side. Well, I would imagine 60, 70% of all plaintiffs' attorneys have worked as defense attorneys. And you get a lot of, and like you said, you got a great opportunity and so that's, you know, it's such a big deal. However, the one thing that both of you know, on Tom's point there, I was a union iron worker, okay, before I got in an I-car business. My father was a rep and all. I think you all read the paper. You saw that a couple of weeks ago with Grace Ferry, we lost three guys that when the parking garage collapsed.
Yeah. When
I got there, and that's because that's our union. My dad, God rest his soul, his wife is still the head administrator of the Ironworkers Union, and I'm a retiree. So I was a job steward, and I happened to see a catastrophic injury. Okay, there's nothing like it. Okay, that guy reached out, like to hit the beam hit the power lines. It was nuts. It was my good friend John O'Malley, decades ago, and that was a devastating thing. In your worlds, okay, people might want to be the lawyer and all that. I knew immediately when I called the union hall, I don't want to be near blood. But when I went to that job site about a month ago, and I saw Matt Kane, who was one of the guys who was buried in the rubble that they had to demo that place. Okay. And his mom was there. Okay. My point is this. Everybody wants I had a buddy of mine in the club business said everybody wants to be the boss, but they don't really want to be the boss. It's the same with an attorney. In other words, you're now meeting Matt, another example, but that family's coming in or that injured worker's walking in. So I might like the fancy suit and the automobile, whatever, the lifestyle, but I don't know what it's like when that family or that disabled individual walks into your office. And I know at this point, Kaleigh, you have a different situation, but I'm saying either way, like Tom just mentioned, you got a lot of people, and then you get dabblers. I bet Kaleigh here loves to go to court when she's got somebody who, because she knows workers' comp from both sides, that knows they don't know what the hell they're doing. Okay, and we all have seen lives get changed at that point, but on the first point, Tom, what is it like when that person comes in, a catastrophic injury, they've lost a limb or something, or a family in a death case? And Kaleigh, you can answer that also. Then we'll get into the other question.
Yeah, I think, I'm going to look at your question a little bit differently in that it's certainly very important that you're empathetic, particularly when you're dealing with someone that has a catastrophic injury. You may not even be talking to that person. You may be talking to their friends or their family,
right?
And you need to very quickly give them guidance so that something doesn't go wrong. And one of the most important things and most overlooked things you'll see in a catastrophic claim is the defense lawyer you have on the other side. Because if you have someone that doesn't know what they're doing, or they're just belligerent or rude, you are going to have a very hard time getting what needs to be done.
Yeah. And Kaleigh, if you would, to that point, we started off talking about how complicated workers' comp is. You know it from both sides. Like Tom said, what is it like? And we're talking about justice here because I've heard it from both. When you know that you're dealing with a dabbler on the other side, and you also know, because you're a good lawyer, that there's a disservice going on there to a client. But that's not it's not your fault. But talk about that because it's such a specialized area.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm walking into a situation where we're seeing a catastrophic injury and there is clear liability on my client's side, I'm looking at the situation, what is going to be the best possible outcome for that individual that's also going to save my client the most money.
Right.
And in those situations, I mean, I'm typically looking at, first off, let's get this person stabilized. We're not doing anything until this person is stabilized,
right,
and we know what they're going to look like. So we need to get a nurse case manager. We need to work with counsel. We need to make sure this person's getting to their appointments. We need to make sure there's transportation. We need to make sure that the services are available and paid for. That's a big important thing that I think a lot of insurance companies miss out on, is making sure that the bills get paid. That is where I see a lot of the litigation starts, is because bills pile up. They're not paying them. Once we see them stabilized and, obviously having some open communication with counsel, and we're seeing them stabilized, we're seeing what they're going to look like end game, then we start talking about what is going to be the best outcome. Do we need something called an MSA, a Medicare set aside? Is this person injured enough? Are they damaged enough that we're looking at long-term, lifelong care? And are we doing that in a manner where they're not going to have to worry about handling those bills? Is it going to be that they need a guardian? Are they able to care for themselves? And then we're looking at, is it possible to set up some kind of settlement? Is that an option here? And in some cases, that's not an option.
right.
And that's something that on my end as a defense attorney, I look at what are the reasonable options here that this person's going to be taken care of, that is going to benefit them the most, but also give us cost saving measures.
You're in-house counsel, right?
Correct.
So how does that differ in a case from dealing with adjusters when you're contracted as because either way, you're I'm assuming you're working with the adjuster. You have to
Yes.
communicate back and forth.
Yes.
Is there a different dynamic
I have found that in this dynamic with being in-house, I have a little bit more control over cases. And we call them claims handlers, so I'm really trying to get into that mentality.
Sure.
But I find that my claims handlers are much more open to what do you believe needs to happen here? And it's the cases where the employer has specialized instructions where it can be a little difficult.
I can tell you from the claimant's perspective, dealing with someone who is in-house at an insurance carrier is much easier.
Wow.
So, and I don't know, I suspect that's part of the reason. I think the other reason is Kaleigh doesn't have to bill time. And as we all know, defense lawyers.
I bill.
Do you?
I do bill. The payment system's just different. It's just how we track the work.
Interesting.
I do bill.
Interesting.
I do bill.
The billing of time by defense firms is how they make money, right?
And by the way, with the pandemic, I guess you're not driving around as much, so that
you're not driving around as much, so the caseload's increased for defense attorneys, which means that stuff gets missed.
So they make up for it, right?
Yeah.
But dealing with those in-house lawyers is much easier. You're not dealing with a lawyer that's just drawing out a case to bill a bunch of time to hit some 2,200 or 2,300 hour minimum they got to do every year. We're going to look at the case pragmatically. And the defense lawyer is looking at it going, what do I need to do to protect my insurer, but also do enough that I'm going to convince this claimant's attorney or this claimant to take whatever this deal is. Like when we're talking about these catastrophic claims, one of the big drivers of whether or not one of these claims can settle are the life care plans, because they can get hideously expensive. I mean, you're trying to take care of somebody who's 40 or 50 years old for the rest of their life in a skilled nursing facility. You're looking $10-15 million. So it can be very, very expensive.
And then you're talking, we're getting Medicare involved. There's approval processes for that. And then you have to get into the specific like approvals through the Medicare set aside. I mean, you're going through it with fine tooth comb.
We talked about how complex workers' compensation can be from the plaintiff side. And of course, you know that, but is that, is that mirrored obviously on the defense side? Because you have to, obviously, if there's changes in the law and all that, I mean, you have to be, or statutes or whatever. Is it the same on the defense side?
It's the same in a way. So I still have a client that I need to keep happy. I still have a client that has some general say in what I do. But I do think that there are less emotions involved than there is with the claimant side of things. And it makes it easier for my clients to make decisions.
Having said that, though, there has to be, insurance is obviously vital. Okay. And there has to be accountability. And there has to be, otherwise there wouldn't be an insurance system. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about, expectations when it comes to the defense side. In other words, Tom, you have, and the plaintiff side, when you represent a client, okay, the client has expectations. Okay, and I think, I don't even know if we're going to get into a little AI talk, but, and so having said that, I talk to, we do shows we do a lot of legal radio, and you will meet people that are like, well, the world's coming to an end, and yes, AI, anybody who it doesn't think AI is going to make a major play on this planet and a million things, but
already is.
They're delusional if they're thinking that.
But my point is that the law is very important when it comes to person, like in other words, you need to be able to keep your client happy. You need, in your world, Tom, talk about what clients can expect from you when they retain you and the firm.
Sure. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Our philosophy is you should have direct access to the people who are handling your case. We are not an assembly line. You're not shoved from department to department until your case is ultimately settled for some low dollar figure. You have one lawyer and one paralegal from start to finish. And that is the person you are talking to, whether it's the paralegal or the attorney. You have your lawyer's cell phone number. That's how I think the business should work. And I think the other piece of what you mentioned about AI, I think ties into client expectations, because one of the things we are seeing is people are Googling their cases. or they're putting their case facts into a chat GPT or something like that.
Trying to get some value on what it should settle for.
Oh, yeah.
That's
They called me and they're like, I think my knee sprain where I went back to work 3 days later is worth $250,000 because
the internet told me the internet told me I should be getting $1 million for my sprained shoulder that doesn't need surgery.
Well, somebody in North Dakota got it. Or the best example of all.
My buddy down the street settled a shoulder case for $250,000. So why is mine only 60?
AI is making that worse.
Right.
And so I have said to more than one client after they've sent me a 12-paragraph email asking me questions about their case.
Which was absolutely written by AI.
All AI. So I pick up the phone and I ask them, which AI model are you using? And then we'll answer your question.
Well, it's interesting because the big case in law when it comes to that is the Starbucks case, right? Everybody's like, well, they got 20 million or whatever, $10 million for a spilled cup of coffee. There's
the McDonald's case. Yeah, the McDonald's case.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so now they don't tell the whole story there.
Well, and do you know why?
Horrific burn.
It got turned around, right?
No. So what actually happened? Because I've read this case, and I've had to do research on it for a class. She had to sign non-disclosure agreements about the case in general, and the most that was allowed to be released was hot coffee spilled on her, and she sued and got money. Yeah. So they use their PI to turn around and make a play for outrageous lawsuits.
Yeah.
When in reality, she had 4th-degree burns.
Yeah, she did
on her genital.
And from what I understand, McDonald's had been warned many times, but
it's worse than that. I mean,
it's worse than that.
So you didn't go back for a second cup.
It
right?
released a dozen times. The health inspector told them that the coffee machine was turned up too high. Several people had already had burns.
Oh my God.
From it. And she had the cup of coffee. They did not appropriately fasten the lid. And it spilled onto her lap, on her genital areas. I think she had 3 cosmetic surgeries to try to fix.
It was the amount of pain, suffering, and struggle that poor woman went through for this case.
She did not get enough money.
And then she was ridiculed in the media. And then I think whatever she got was ultimately on appeal was cut down too.
It was because they did put a lot of money into punitive damages, and I think it exceeded the statutory limitations for it.
Yeah, and so there's an example. I'm sure you've heard. It wasn't work comp, I don't think, right? Okay, but there's an example of people. You get that they got this. Where I must be getting 15 million, right?
Yep.
For my sprained ankle.
Well, I think what we have to understand though is when we're consuming media, who are the 2 largest blocks of advertisers, right?
Oh yeah,
pharmaceutical companies and insurers. Nothing against Kaleigh. But
ironically, I have not seen a single ad for the one that I work for since I've joined it.
Well,
that's true. Actually, I haven't seen one recently.
I find that to be very ironic.
Well, let me ask you a question. Do you like sports?
I like to go to sports games. I like to go to baseball and hockey.
I'm a big Formula One fan.
No, he is. I'm a big hockey fan.
Joe Dougherty knows nothing about Formula One.
But my wife and I watch the ball games, right?
Uh-huh.
And so it is true. Like in other words, you get the insurance commercials and all that.
Yeah.
But
you'll see them up on the. They'll have the advertisements on. Yeah.
But it's funny when you see Kyle Schwarber of the Phillies sitting there going, "Yeah, it's better than winning the World Series is getting good car auto insurance." He just signed for $150 million. I'm like, Kyle. I mean,
wouldn't you rather say 15%?
I would. You know what? Take the World Series and shove it. But you're right. Let's talk a little bit about what Tom, do you believe that most injured workers understand their rights and responsibilities when they get injured?
No, I think most people are absolutely clueless. And I would take it a step further than that and say that not only do most employees not know what they're supposed to do, most employers don't know what they're supposed to do.
I would 100% agree with that.
And by the way, talk about how much time does the insurance company spend educating employers on their responsibilities? Because it's
I can't speak for other carriers, but I know that we dedicate, each attorney is allowed to do up to 100 billable hours per year for educational.
Okay.
And that's for claims handlers, the insured, potential insured, we have a whole division and boards that you can join to do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and I imagine because there's rules and regulations, and as an iron worker, what we would have big contractors and small contractors. The big contractors, if you were working on Liberty One or the Bell Atlantic Tower, okay, that job's lasting a year, 2 years, right? But if it's a gas station up the street, you might come out of the union hall, and you're not signing anything. Like, in other words, you're signing, your W-2, and all that. But there are very few, if it's a small contractor, that even understand, what's going on. So now you got the workers that don't know what's going on, and the actual employer that doesn't know what's going on.
And I think that it is bad when the employer doesn't know what's going on, but at least they can go to their insurance company, who will tell them what they need to do. The employees, what I think is the worst out of everything is they often don't know that they even have insurance to cover that. They'll just go home and treat it themselves and think that it's okay, and only go seek help when it gets really bad.
So let's do this, because I want to talk about that, about what happens when somebody gets injured on the job, what they should do. Because now that I can't tell you how many people I know, workers, don't even know what a letter of acknowledgement is or whatever, and so. It's a big confusing, and in the world of ironworking, no one wants to get hurt. The amount of money you're making is ridiculous, but there's a lot of confusion. Let's do this. Let's take a quick break. We're going to have more from the McMenamin and Wing show and our guest, Kaleigh Ryder, in just a minute. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the McMenamin and Wing show here on WWDB Talk 860. We've got a fantastic show. Tom Wing's guest is Kaleigh Ryder, who is a defense attorney for a big insurance company. And we're learning both sides of the aisle here. It's a fascinating conversation. Tom, biggest mistakes people make upon being injured on the job.
The number one mistake people make when they get hurt at work is they try to tough it out. They get hurt at work on a Friday and they say, I'm just going to walk it off. Tough it out over the weekend, walk in on Monday morning and say, hey, I got injured. And the first question that happens when that happens, HR is going to say, what'd you do over the weekend? Were you at your kid's baseball game? What were you doing? Almost all of the claims that we see denied very quickly are denied based on late reporting. Insurers are, and I think, naturally suspicious of late reporting. And I understand why employees, they don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to make waves. They might have just started the job, but
they don't know what the hell they're doing.
Or they don't know what they're doing. But you have to tell someone, because if you don't report the injury, the insurer has no obligation to you. The number one thing you have to do is you report that injury. Now, obviously, number 2, go to the doctor. Number 3, call a lawyer. But you got to report it.
And Kaleigh, in your world, what shows? What raises the most red flags? When you get something comes across your desk and it just kind of like pops up and says there's a red flag there.
Don't say it's my office, please.
So there's going to be 2 things that are going to be a major red flag for me in determining whether or not to tell the adjuster they should advise them on denial or acceptance. Because sometimes they'll come to us and say, what should I do here? First thing I look at is, when did the injury happen and when did they report it? So if I'm seeing a couple of days and then I see nobody was around when the injury happened, and then the next red flag is, well, now they've also already retained an attorney and they're going to a doctor's office that their attorney referred them to. Those are some major red flags to me. And if I see those, I'm going to dig in a little bit more, look at the medical records, see if it makes sense for the mechanism. And if it doesn't, we're going to deny it and we're going to try to litigate it, because that's going to ultimately what's going to save the client money.
And Tom, typically speaking, when do you get calls? Because
it runs the gamut. I mean,
Yeah.
I'll have people that will call. I mean, people that know or have had a claim before are going to call me on their way to the hospital, and we're going to get them away from Concentra or wherever pretty quickly and to a doctor. which, sometimes can result in a denied claim. But I think the important part of what Kaleigh said is the mechanism has to make sense, because they're looking for fraud, right? They're looking for somebody trying to ride the system. And so, if you have somebody that fell off of the roof of a building and they're going to an orthopedic surgeon and they're having surgery, that claim's not getting denied. It doesn't matter who the doctor is.
That's not getting denied.
Obviously.
Right.
No.
But the guy that slipped and fell in the bathroom unwitnessed on his third day of work, that's going to raise some eyebrows at the insurer. And if he's treating at a chiropractor on day one and has Joe Schmo law firm on a billboard who sends a letter to report the injury, that's going to raise some eyebrows.
You have a lot, please, if you will.
Oh, no, I 100% agree. Especially if I'm seeing like one of those major billboard lawyers already on and it's day 10 of the injury. That is a major red flag to me. And the slip and falls, especially if I'm seeing Joe Schmo slipped and fell in the bathroom, nobody's around. He reported it 4 days later. And by the way, he's treating for his shoulder. That's not going to make any sense to me for a slip and fall.
So a lot of people, especially in our world, I had a situation not long ago. We had an advocacy program, simply with the labor unions. I do the labor radio show here. So it's not active now, but we did it for several years. But so I'll get a call from a union official and get a scenario where you got a union ironworking boss. He's been working for the same company for 35 years. This guy doesn't want to miss a minute, okay? However, he got in a situation where he injured his shoulder. Now, he was working light duty. They in other words, he's a stereotypical dude that's making so much money. He's working steady for a contract. Doesn't want to lose anything. But they sent him to, we're talking medical now. They sent him to, I guess, one of the Concentras or one of those work hab places. And he's there for a month and his arm is not getting better. He's getting paid. He's not like, in other words, he's going to work every day, but he is in a dangerous situation. We're union iron workers. So you can see us on TikTok or any, like climbing, the columns and walking the beams. And the doctor wanted to get, or it wasn't a doctor, it was an assistant medical.
A PA.
A PA. And so she did an x-ray, not an MRI. And she wants to put him on a workout plan. He said to her, first of all, you don't have a diagnosis. And I'm in big time pain here. What am I going to do? So the union official called me, and I'm not an attorney. I immediately, what we would do would be to just they have their own support systems, and we would connect them to that or whatever. But just as a friend, because I'm an iron worker, he calls me up, and so I connected him and said, look, you need to know your legal rights, number one. But number two, you need to see a doctor that can, give you a proper diagnosis. It was very confusing to this guy. He didn't want to do anything to mess his position up. But in the meantime, we're talking about legalities here. But what about his shoulder? At this point, he's like, I want to do therapy, but you got to tell me what the hell's really wrong with me.
And it's such a delicate situation when you have somebody with a job like that, because they are not going to get a comp rate anywhere near what they're bringing home.
Not at all.
Yeah, no. I think it's important to add to the discussion. I make fun of Concentras, those types of sort of Walmarts of doctors that don't really do a whole heck of a lot on this program. And they do serve a legitimate purpose. And in my view, what that purpose are the people that have the sprains and strains that honestly, if they did absolutely nothing, they would get better in a month, 6 weeks, and they're going to be fine. They just go in and make sure, you're not going to bleed out or something.
Right.
That's the purpose that, in my view, what those types of organizations serve. What you're describing is someone who has a more significant injury. And those outfits, in my view, are not incentivized to treat those types of injuries appropriately.
Well, the problem with that, Tom, was he's a foreman with the company, and when he gets injured, which that doesn't happen, he's going to his boss. He's not calling a lawyer and finding that as legal rights. Because go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say the issue there, because you said it's only a month after the injury. Panel. He's got to trade on panel if it's accepted.
Although we all know that I'm going to find a reason to pull him from the panel, but we're going to send that guy for an MRI.
We all know that Tom is going to send him to the ER and tell them that he fell and he thinks he's and that he can't lift his arm, so that they do a CT scan.
All right, kids.
Well, so I think the important thing is these WorkNet Concentra types of doctors
are not for catastrophic injuries.
They're not. And they're not designed that way. They're urgent care centers. They do occupational physicals. They do drug tests. They're really kind of set up to be an assembly line.
They're supposed to be a filter.
Yeah.
Right.
They're supposed to be a filter. When you get this person that has the shoulder injury, the filter is supposed to be, let's get you scheduled for an MRI and set up with a referral for ortho. And that just does not happen.
And what happened was he said to her after a month, I think 6 weeks, I want an MRI to find out what the hell's wrong before you put me on. It wasn't the first day. So in other words, it wasn't somebody, and this guy wants back. And by the way, he ended up going back to work. But
the union guys always go back to work.
Yeah, they'll get him back in a modified position.
Yeah, I mean, well, he's a foreman as it is, so he's not climbing and all that. But you are climbing up ladders and doing stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
And so, but it was an interesting situation. I want to ask Kaleigh and so here's an interesting point. And when we're talking medical. And I clearly not a lawyer, and in many ways, Kaleigh, just like you didn't, you had a different career path, and so did I. And so, I'm fortunate. We're both fortunate to land where we landed. But I never imagined I'd be interviewing lawyers and in the legal field.
It's weird how things work out in the world.
It is. And so, but I've learned a lot on these shows with, and most of my depositions myself as a nightclub owner were on the defense side. So I understand and empathize with that, especially when you're getting slip and falls at a facility where there's no incident reports and it's pulling your hair out because your rates are going up. But my point is, you get in a situation now where you have, how could I even find a medical provider that would be an advocate as an injured worker unless I met Tom Wing or somebody who could point, because if I go to my family doctor,
they're gonna send you to whoever they have a contract with.
Or they're gonna tell you, I don't do that. Yep. And then in your world, and I'm talking about when you just meet in the middle at the whatever the hearing is, there are typical work hab specialists, there are different specialists that handle that. And I've heard stories, across the board where the defense will sit there and point out, okay, well, this person only does injured workers, and then the plaintiffs sit here going, well, tell me about your guy. How does that kind of like work? And in a sense, because if I didn't meet Tom and I was injured, I wouldn't have anybody I could go to, but somebody like with the reputation, at least on the plaintiff side, of somebody who doesn't care about my real situation, like the situation my buddy was in.
Well, first, I'm just going to comment. The judges really don't care that the doctors only do one side or the other. They expect it. Right. So we'll play off of it, but the judge isn't going to care. That's not what they're looking at.
The judge wasn't born yesterday, right?
Well, you have to understand.
The judge sees them every single day.
Yeah.
They see them as more often than we do, I think. But to answer your actual question, so I would say that there's really two ways. The insurance answer is talk to your nurse case manager. Tell them your concerns. They will be they are supposed to be your advocate to get into those types of facilities. They are supposed to be able to coordinate that. The claimant's answer, which I think is the one that Tom may agree with a bit more, is if you are having significant pain, you can go to an emergency orthopedic walk-in clinic. Most facilities that have a walk-in clinic are going to be part of the workers' compensation kind of circuit. A big example of that in Harrisburg is OIP. OIP has a walk-in clinic. It's open from, I think, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and they will see anything orthopedic related. Your Concentra that you're going to is most likely going to be operating on an appointment basis. So a good way to get around that panel provider is, I am having an increase in pain. My symptoms are different. I'm going to go to an emergency walk-in clinic.
Right.
And that is a good way to get an appointment.
If you don't have your appointment with your panel provider, you can go if you're in excessive pain.
Yep.
And nobody.
And that orthopedic walk-in clinic is going to, for that shoulder, they're going to order an MRI immediately. And I can say that because I went to an orthopedic walk-in clinic when I injured my shoulder, and they ordered an MRI that day. They're going to get you set up with an appointment for an orthopedic surgeon so that they can go over that MRI. They may, if they have concerns, get you set up for an EMG. And you are going to have that booking within, 6 to 8 weeks, you think, for the MRI? And then you're going to have your orthopedic appointment a week later.
Okay, so I have an interesting question. This is like an insider question. I've always wondered this.
Mm-hmm.
So we talked about some of them contractors that, they got their insurance policy and they have they don't post anything. There's no panel acknowledgement letter.
That's illegal.
And what's that?
That's illegal. You
But
can't
it
do
happens all the time.
Technically, per the act and per the law, every employer must post somewhere, typically in a break room, their panel provider list, the workers' compensation rights that an employee has, and documentation of who their insurance policy is with.
Right. But when I started the show, I told you when you get the big employers, they all got it. They have HR department.
Yep.
But if you get a small contractor who's got one foreman and his wife is doing the books, but I'm going to give you an example, and I'm even going to unionize, and they're a union contract, guys are former iron workers or electrician, whatever, and he's taking his shot to go out there. He's got a lot on his mind. He doesn't do it. My question is, now at this point, there's no panelist. You can basically go to the doctor that you want. My question is, how does that reaction at this point? The employer did not follow the rules, and now the individual has gone to a doctor that's an advocate doctor. How does that impact your world?
Well, first off, I'm going to say good job on the injured worker for going where they would like to go then, because that's the correct move if there's no panel provider listed. But from my perspective, if that happens, I am having a serious conversation with that employer about posting the panel list and emphasizing you are now in a position where it's going to be harder to deny your claim.
I was going to jump in and say, it is rare that I find an employer that followed all of the panel list rules.
I would agree.
Some of that is not on the employers, it's on the insurers. Because what happens in reality is they pick up the phone, they called their insurance broker and said, hey, I need workers' comp insurance. That broker shopped and found the cheapest insurance that they could find, and they signed and they got issued a binder. And then 6 weeks later in the mail, the panel list comes in the mail, and there's a little letter from whatever insurance company that says, hang this in your break room. And oh, by the way, you need to give this to all of your employees when they're hired. Oh, and when they're injured, and it's got to comply with all of these other things.
Right.
And then not to mention that panel provider list never gets updated. The number of clients that I had.
By the way, what are the requirements there? Because if I live in Philly, this job is in Northeast Philly, and the panel requirement list or the panel list is up in Delaware County. I mean, in other words,
Delco's not too far from Philly, but if it was in Harrisburg and you're living in Philly, you're not going to be stuck with that list.
I would be making if I was claimant's counsel, I'd make the argument you can treat where you would like.
Okay, so Tom, how often when an injured worker comes in, do they have no idea if they even signed it? Like, sometimes we'll sign up and do it. They'll give you a bunch of paperwork and we're like, what the hell?
So I can tell you how we handle it.
How do you handle it?
Most of the time, they do not know. And I'll ask them, was anything posted in like your break room? And they're not sure. They almost never know. But I'll ask them, when you filled out an incident report, did you sign anything other than the incident report? Usually they know the answer to that. But they got to give it to them at the time of hire too. And most people have no clue what they signed when they were hired. They're like, oh yeah, I signed a bunch of paperwork. But the beauty of it is not the claimant's burden to show that the employer didn't follow the panel list. It's not my job to prove a negative. It is essentially an affirmative defense for the first 90 days of medical care. When we talk about a panel list, we're talking about insurer-controlled medical care in the first 90 days of a claim. It can be longer than that, but generally it's 90 days of the claim. If the insurer did everything they're supposed to do, and they can show that to a judge, if I file a penalty petition or a claim petition, depending on the claim status, then they don't have to pay for that care. It's an affirmative defense. I don't need to show that they didn't do it. So we operate on the assumption, unless the claimant says to us, oh yeah, I signed a bunch of paperwork and I was hired, and here's a copy of the list that I got when I signed when I was injured. And oh yeah, it's posted in the break room. We operate on the assumption that they didn't get it. And we let the insurer prove it. And they almost never do.
That's my next question to Kaleigh. I know when you're looking at a when you're looking at a new claim, okay, you're looking at the reporting and all that stuff. But what do you do when it comes to that?
I mean, generally speaking, it's not the first thing that I look at. The only time I'm looking at whether or not we should be denying a medical bill in the first 90 days is really if there's excessive and unreasonable care. So I'm looking for that guy who had the slip and fall and he starts treating for his shoulder. That's something I'm going to look more into. Do we need to see if there is a panel list? Do we need to see if they got that? Generally speaking, Joe Schmo, who, they went to Concentra and then they said they went to like a walk-in clinic at an orthopedics office. And that injury seems like it could have come from what he's saying. I'm not going to go and nitpick that bill. It's $150 in the grand scheme of things. That is not what's going to affect my case. It's the outcome of going to that orthopedic clinic that's going to impact my case.
Tom, talk about the, I guess, the ebbs and flows of a workers' compensation case in regards to, treatment and staying, communicative and all, and somebody, what are the right, what's the right path when it comes, and at what point we only have a couple minutes left. When somebody seems to be chronically injured, when does a settlement, when does that conversation come in?
Sure, I would say the timeline for medical treatment is highly dependent on what the injury is. In sort of what we would call the standard case, I mean, every case is a little bit different, but you're going to have somebody that has an injury that is more than a sprain, right? But probably less than something that's catastrophic. We expect them to go back to work. Maybe they need a small procedure. Maybe it's a surgery. Maybe it's injections. That's usually what we're seeing. In those cases, they're going to go to a doctor, they're going to get treatment, and then at some point, they're either going to return to work or the case is likely to resolve. Most cases don't go to trial in this day and age. We do try about maybe 3% of the cases that come through the office, but most of the cases are going to settle, or the person's going to go back to work. And the comp will just pay them for the time they were out, take care of the medical bills, and the claim closes. From the insurer perspective, that's what they would like, right? In every case, they just do what they have to do, and then they go back to work. But in many cases, they aren't able to go back to work, and that's when the case is going to settle.
Yeah, and from your side of the table, Kaleigh, when do you start to see, okay, maybe things aren't going to get better with this individual, or and when are those talks? When are they open?
I'm looking, so it's a balance. I'm looking at what the potential exposure is, and I am looking for the point where settlement is going to cost less than the potential exposure of a case. So I'm looking at somebody who has plateaued in treatment. They might not be maximum medical improvement, but it's pretty clear that there isn't going to be a whole lot more that's going to make them better. And then I'm looking at how much are their medical expenses and wage payments going to cost us into the future if we were to do a 500-week cap. And is settlement going to potentially cost less than that?
And Tom, when you're in that process, okay, you're representing your client, obviously, and how do you evaluate something? So I imagine if there's a 25-year-old kid.
I mean, we're looking at it the same way Kaleigh's looking at it, to be honest with you. These cases are much easier to evaluate than, say, a personal injury case where you're trying to put numbers on pain and suffering or anguish. Like you imagine, somebody's kid dies and you file a lawsuit. Like, how do you put a number on that?
No, you can't.
In workers' comp, there's a formula, right? We know how much their medical bills are. We're receiving those bills. We know how much those wage payments are supposed to be because they're getting them every 2 weeks. We can project that out, whether they're going to be under the cap for the 500-week partial, because workers' comp benefits are capped for most people at 500 weeks.
If I'm lucky.
Right. If you're lucky. But it's very rare because we have impairment rating evaluations that essentially will turn someone from totally disabled to partially disabled automatically, essentially, depending on when they do the exam.
So,
but we look at the same metrics that the defense
and I'm just going to jump in and say, I mean, honestly, I think if you gave us a comprehensive fact pattern and put us in two separate rooms, our ranges for settlement are going to overlap.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to say one thing. This has been the fastest hour in radio.
I've heard that before.
Well,
but I think this time it's true.
This time it's true. Listen, I want to, thank everybody, obviously, for joining us on the broadcast. Kaleigh Ryder, your first radio experience.
It was enjoyable. I had fun.
You were fantastic.
Happy to come back anytime.
And we want to thank you, obviously, not just for being here, but also for sharing your story. Very inspirational. Tom Wing, if you will, contact information if somebody wants to get in touch.
workerscompadvocates.com. And I just want to say, Isabel did a great job keeping Matt in line. He barely got out of that chair.
Damn right. Well, and we can't forget about Matt Dietz. Fantastic job in production. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the McMenamin Wing show here on WWDB Talk 860. Of course, we want to thank Kaleigh Ryder for being our guest and our host, Tom Wing, and our producer, Matt Dietz. On behalf of everybody on the panel, I'm Joe Dougherty. Thanks for listening.